In this video, we're going to resume on page 560, and we're going to be looking at shapes. And shapes are something that we sort of toyed with a little bit, but we're going to dig into it a little bit more. And we'll look at a number of different properties that are applied to all the different shapes that we're going to work with, and fill, stroke, width, etc. And then it also introduces these classes. Notice that text, even though we don't consider it a shape, is actually part of the class. Line, rectangle, circle, ellipse, arc, polygon, and polyline. And some of those do get pretty complicated because they are mathematically based. So when you get away from like a circle and you start dealing with arcs, you're dealing with all sorts of advanced mathematics to try to render those things. And having at least a rudimentary understanding is helpful. Alright, this first one here, the text class, it says defines a node that displays a string at a particular starting point. So we can actually pick a point on the screen and then tell the text to start there. And that's, as it says here, the upper left corner point. Now notice here that as we work through this example, that really all the shapes are basically part of a node, and these are all the different possibilities for it. Notice that these are the properties for the text shape. So the fact that it is a text and the string that would go into it. Positioning, underline, strike through, and font. Those I think are pretty intuitive, and they show a variety of all of them. And then they go through an example here, which you should try and see how that they're putting in panes, creating your text, positioning, and the string that goes in. And then of course we're setting fonts, and then we're doing a couple other things. Notice the escape character here. And then we're going to end up putting that up on the screen, and I think that was already seen here. That's what's going on there. We're just demonstrating those things. Notice that we can also create a line, and it's got start X and Y and end X and Y. So we can actually draw from one particular position on the screen to another. Now, I think that the interesting thing is that the syntax is not really that difficult, but what is unique here is the fact that we are actually starting at a certain point and ending at a certain point. So even though it is a line, we can make it go on an angle. It doesn't have to be straight across or straight up and down, and that's kind of an interesting little feature, I think. In addition, we can create rectangles, and one of the things that we can do with rectangles is we can set their starting position, the width, the height, the arc width, and the arc height. Now notice it says the rectangle's upper left corner point is XY, and the parameter AW, arc width, is the horizontal diameter of the arcs at the corner. So that means that we can create rounded corners. So for example, you see how this shape's got slightly rounded corners, and that is used to set those particular features. I would suggest to you that you go through and you get the code for these, or type it in and play with the shapes, adjust the values, and find values that you think look cool, or just see what they do, and basically just experiment. The next section is the circle and the ellipse, and a circle of course is perfectly round, meaning that the radius is equivalent as you traverse the whole circle. Now an ellipse is a little bit different, and an ellipse allows us to create shapes that are not uniform with the radius. So the radius actually changes with an ellipse. So here notice that the radius is a double property, and here we actually have two. So we have a radius for the x direction and a radius for the y direction. So in other words, if you think of the shape of a football, how the height is less than the width. So the radius going across horizontally is wider than the radius going up and down, and that's how we get that shape. And that's something that we define. Now with this little example here, and this is exactly what I was talking about, they not only create an ellipse, but they also set up a loop here. And then every time it goes through the loop, they multiply the, our counter basically, so that it rotates around the center point and creates this pattern. So if you know a little bit of math and you can fiddle with it a little bit, you can see that you can create some interesting stuff on the screen. Alright, so the next one here, this is where it gets a little bit deeper in terms of what we're doing. So an arc is really, if you think about it, an arc is just a part of a rounded object. So a circle, if we start at one point on the circle and move over a little bit, we would be dealing with an arc. And even though it seems like it'd be hard to describe mathematically, there are methods for it. And really, in this context, they're actually thinking of the arc not just in terms of the circle, but as part of an ellipse. So in order to accomplish that, they actually have several different properties. Now this is basically like the concept that we're using to create the ellipse. So we have that like two different radiuses, but then we're also dealing with the length at a particular point. So by knowing that particular point, we also can figure out the start angle and then figure out the length, and then we end up with basically like this little pie shape. And then not only do we have that, but we also have these additional aspects, which are an arc that's open, an arc that's round, or in other words, the whole pie shape going right to the center. We also have these chords, which are basically the outer part of the circle, and then a straight line between the 2 points at the end of the circle. And those are all possible using these tools. Now these as well will take a little bit of playing with in order to get all the different parameters right. And I'm not going to exhaust that here. I think that what's best is that you play with it, and then as it's needed for the assignment, you can invoke it. I should also give you a hint that I'm not going to make you do a lot with arcs. So, but it is kind of interesting. And then also they point out here that you can have degrees and then how they're notated. So if you're going positive degrees and negative degrees, and what that does to the mathematics of it all. Next shapes that we're looking at are Polygon and Polyline. And if you've ever done image maps in HTML, and we, these days we don't really teach that anymore, but it is still there. Basically, what you do is you create a shape and you locate all the positions for that shape and list them as XY coordinates, and the number of those coordinates will indicate the shape and where the lines flow to and from. So the only difference now between a polygon and a polyline is that the polygon is actually closed, so it creates a closed object that you can fill, where a polyline just creates the line and that's it. Alright, now they go through and they explain all these different mathematical functions, and if you know all these mathematical functions, it will actually allow you to create any certain type of shape that you can think of. It's just a matter of knowing the math to get that done. My goal here is not to teach you that math, but just to talk about it. So I'm hoping now that you see from just doing all that there is quite a bit to learn there. I am going to cap the videos for the chapter here, but I would encourage you, if you have time on your hands, which I'm sure you all do, is to go through and do this case study here where they implement a lot of the techniques that we've just seen and create this clock pane class. In other words, if you look ahead, basically we're going to be creating a circle, there's lines inside, there's numbers, there's all sorts of stuff that is created. Alright, I will cap the video here at the top of page 572, and that ends the lecture videos for chapter 14. The subsequent videos will show you how to walk through the homework in chapter 14. Good luck with your code.